Hey everyone, welcome back to the next Pygame tutorial. In this one, we're actually going to do something really cool. I'm going to get the game to work with an Xbox controller and a PS4 controller. It should work on a Switch controller as well if you have one of those. I actually haven't done this in a while, so we may run into a little bit of trouble, but let's go ahead and get started. It shouldn't be too hard. It's not exactly like getting keyboard input set up. It's slightly different. The first thing I want to do is a little bit of cleanup though. So if we go to our main file, what I want to do is clean up. See how this handle events section's kind of big? I mean, it's not too big. It's like 15 lines of code. But it's about to get really big when we start checking for all the buttons on multiple controllers as well. So what I kind of want to do is encapsulate all this stuff into its own object, and that way this whole thing just turns into one line of code, and all the logic for how input's detected is in its own file. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to make a class. So I'll make a new file, and I'm going to call it EventHandler. So we're going to make an EventHandler class that has all the logic for how controller support works and keyboard presses work. So let's go ahead and make the object. So we'll do class EventHandler. It doesn't inherit from anything. And right now, I don't think we need to pass or put anything into the constructor method. I'm going to probably set up, I'll show you in a second. So it's going to have one method, and that's called handle events. And this handle events method, everything we put in that main file, right here where it says handle events, I'm going to copy all that, and that's going to be put in the handle events method right here. So we do need to import Pygame because it's complaining about that. So let's import Pygame. And now, if you've ever noticed, I don't know if you use PyCharm, but it'll complain sometimes on some of these methods. It has this yellow underscore, and it'll be like, "Hey, this method looks static," and that's because this particular method right here that we're using, it doesn't. If you read in here, we have nothing that's referencing the object itself, and you can tell that because the word self is nowhere in this function. So what you want to do to get rid of that, you can put a decorator at the top and put @static method, and then you can actually remove self from here, and it'll stop complaining about that. We actually are in a second going to end up making it have self though, so I'm going to take that out. But that's why it's complaining right there. It also needs to have something. Clearly see how we use the player object and some of its logic, and this class doesn't know about the player object. So we would have to, when we handle events, we would have to pass a player in here. And typically in games, I call that an actor. It's whatever your controller is currently controlling in the game, whether that's a menu, a player. Like if you have multiple, like a character select screen and you can pick multiple characters in a game, those characters can always change. It's not always going to be the same object. Like if you had a fighting game and you have like Street Fighter and you have Ryu, Ken, Guile, you're not always going to be playing as Ryu, so you wouldn't do like Ryu.velocityx equals Ryu.speed. You could pick a different character and it always changes. So I just use the term actor, so we're going to pass an actor into here. And everywhere I put player, I'm just going to put actor. And that should stop complaining about that. So let's copy all these. There we go. The only thing we would need to make sure of is every possible actor that can come in here does have these type of attributes, so the game doesn't crash. Like if you throw someone in here that doesn't have a velocity X, it's obviously going to crash when it gets here. But you just need to make sure and design your game to where all the actors kind of have the same attributes and methods that they can run. So now that we have that in here, we can go to our main file. We can go ahead and erase all that in the handle event section, and we can, from EventHandler, import the EventHandler object. And right on our object setup at the top, I'm going to put EventHandler equals an EventHandler object. And where all those lines of code that's eventually going to be like 60 lines or 70 lines, we can just put EventHandler.handle events. And it requires an actor. And the only thing we're going to be controlling in this game is the player. So we're going to pass the player in. So whatever current player we have, all that stuff will get thrown into the EventHandler class, and it should work the exact same. But this code's about to get really thick once we add controller support. So that's why I wanted to kind of encapsulate it all in its own class and put it in its own file. So our game should still work. Oops, that's something later I'm going to show you. Where's main? Run main. Yeah, so it still works the same. All right, so I haven't shown you this, but I'm going to show it to you now. I don't know if you've ever looked up Python documentation documents for any type of module, but Pygame has by far the best website for its documentation over any other module I've ever tried to learn. It's so easy to read and figure out how everything works. So this is what it looks like. And every single module that comes with Pygame is listed at the top. There's a link for it. So there's a color module, display module, draw module, event module, font, and so on and so forth. This is all of them. If you want to know how any of them work or what methods these different types of objects have, like say you want to know everything a surface object can do, you can click surface, bam, here's everything a surface can do. If you want to set its alpha value, which is its transparency, oh, I want to know how to do that. You just click it, it takes you to the description of it. Tells you how it works. It tells you what parameters it takes, tells you what type of object it returns once you run it. In this case, this doesn't return anything. It just sets the alpha value of a surface. We're actually going to be using that later. But what we're interested in, if you go under the advanced stuff category, there's a joystick module. So I'm going to click that. And this is how to use joysticks with Pygame. And the first thing you actually want to go to, because every joystick's kind of different, this is some pre-made code that Pygame gives you to save to a file and run. And when you run this, it actually brings a window up on the screen, and then you can press the buttons on the controller, and it'll actually tell you like the values that are generated by pressing those buttons, so you can write logic for how to handle them in your game. Whoops, dropped my controller. So I've already done that. I've already copied all this code, and I've put it in a file called Joystick Tester. So what I'm going to do is run Joystick Tester, and it brings a window up. And, oh, my controller unplugged itself. Let me plug it in. So this is just a regular Xbox controller. Let's run it. There you go. So it gives you all the values of everything I'm pressing on the controller. And what you need to do is actually write, like, you need to test this. So button 0. So I'm pressing A on the controller, and it's saying that's button value 0. So I need to go through each one of these one by one and kind of write them down. What I'm going to do, I'm actually going to put this off screen real quick, but I'm going to put all this in our constants file. So I'm going to go to constants.py, and let's put some comments here. This is all display information. I'm going to have another section called joystick information. So I'm going to make a variable in our constants file that has the value of every single button, just so it's nice and organized. So what's the naming convention I want to use? We'll do like XB for Xbox underscore A for like A button. And I'm pressing A on the controller. I gotta keep clicking back and forth. So that's button 0. So that equals 0. And then we'll do XB underscore B for the B button. That is button 1. XBX. The X button is button 2. And I believe the PS4 button, these values are actually different, so you would kind of have to write logic to detect if it's a PS4 or Xbox controller. And we'll eventually do that, but we're just going to do Xbox for right now. And this might take a second, so sorry if it bores you, but we got to do it. So that's 3. So those are all in order. Then what I want to do is, let's do XB and left bumper. So the left bumper is 4. I'm getting lucky. All these are in order. XB right bumper, or yeah, right 5. I'm used to PS4 controller, so I call that R1. And then Xbox left trigger. So the triggers are a little different. They're not actually. We're gonna leave those out for now because they're not actually a button value. If you look over here, the triggers, since they're analog, it actually is this axis 2 value, and it generates a floating point number between 0 and 1. And it's actually axis 2 is also the right trigger, but instead of going up, it goes down. It goes between 0 and -1. So we're not using those right now, but we'll write logic for those later. The next thing is like Xbox start button, which is that's button 7, and Xbox select button. I know they're not actually called start and select anymore, but I'm old school, and that's what I've always called them. And that's button 6. So let's put all those in order. Now we need the D-pad. The D-pad's a bit differently. It doesn't like if I press right on the D-pad, it doesn't generate. The D-pad's actually called a hat, and it's hat 0 because there's only one D-pad, and it actually generates a tuple. And you can think of these as like coordinates. 0, 0 is neutral. If I press up, that's up on the y-axis, so it's 0, 1. If you press right, that's 1 on the x-axis, so it's 1, 0. But if I press diagonal upright, it should be 1, 1. So it's just like looking at a graph, and it's like wherever you're pressing is the vector that the line's going in. So we can go ahead and do all that. So we got D-pad or Xbox hat up, which is gonna equal 0, 1. Xbox hat down, which equals 0, -1. Xbox hat left, which is going to equal -1, 0. Xbox hat right equals, right would be 1, 0. So that's all the D-pad information. So now we can actually start writing our code for controllers, and that's what we're gonna when we create an event handler object, it's gonna create a controller object if it detects a controller. And let me pull, because I will have to read their documentation real quick. It's been a while since I've done this with a joystick, but it tells you how to do everything. So first thing we need to do right when we make this event handler object is detect if there even is a joystick. So you can do make a variable called self.number of joysticks. So num joysticks equals pygame.joystick.get count. So we only have one controller connected to the computer, so it's going to return a value of 1. And then what we can do is do if self.number of joysticks, meaning if there is anything even in there besides a 0, then do this. We're actually going to do this. Self dot, what do I want to call it? We'll do joystick. So we're just going to make a variable right here called joysticks, and there's nothing assigned to it yet. But right here, we're going to do if there are joysticks attached, then self.joystick equals, let me look up the documentation here. Yeah, we're going to make a joystick object, and then here, I'll show you what I read. They're kind of doing it all in one line. I'm not going to do it this way because it is cleaner. It only takes up one line, but I like doing it my way. But essentially what this is doing is it says, hey, for every joystick that this get count method returns, go ahead and make a joystick object. And it's all put in a list, so it's going to put a list of every joystick object. So what we need to do is pygame.joystick.joystick. We're going to create a joystick object if there is a joystick attached, and you have to give it an ID. And I'm pretty sure this will work. You can give the ID 0. It's just a number that represents that joystick. So if you have multiple players, you can have 0, 1, 2, 3. All right, so now we have our joystick object. It's stored right here. Self.joystick equals none, but then we detected a joystick attached, and we're making a joystick object and assigning it to that variable. So now we can go down here into this handle events section. And let's see, so we're checking, this is all like keyboard information. And I'm going to clean this up even further. So see how this handle events, if something gets like more than 10 lines of code long, it starts bugging my OCD, and I like splitting it up into multiple functions. Some of that's inevitable though. Some of your code's going to be that long. But what I'm going to do is all this stuff right here, I'm going to make a method called check quit event, and it's going to require an actual event to check. But I'm going to cut all this right here and paste it in there. And right here, I'm going to do self.checkQuit event, and we're going to pass the event into it. And then right here, where it's checking all the keyboard information, we're going to do def check keyboard event. And it also requires the event to check. And then we can cut and paste all this stuff into our check keyboard event. And it also requires the actor, because it's got all the keyboard buttons are going to be performed on the actual player. So then we could put self.check keyboard event and pass the event and the actor into it. Clean this up. Oh. And all that should, why is it complaining about this? Maybe stat. Oh, it's because we don't have any self in here, but there will be in a second. Now, remember how I was talking about that decorator, the static method? This check quit event, even though we're passing a reference of the object itself in here, nowhere in here are we actually using an instance of the object. This is just a static method. It just closes out of the program when we press the X button. So I actually am going to put the decorator there and put static method and remove self. You don't have to do this, but it's just cleaner. And remove that just so it stops complaining at me. So now this handle events code that we have is only 2 lines, and then we can make another one called self.check joystick event. So it's going to check keyboard presses and then joystick presses, and it's going to be very similar to the keyboard event, only it's checking joystick presses. So we'll do check joystick event, and we'll make the method down here. So joystick event, it requires event and an actor. All right, so now we can start writing our joystick code. And actually, first, let's make sure I didn't break anything. Let's still run our game. Yeah, so everything's still working. All right, so now we need to do, up here, we did if event type equals pygame.keydown. It's kind of similar. So we do if event.type equals pygame.joy. We'll do hat motion, and then you can do if self.joystick, and it's joystick 0 dot, I think it's get hat is what it is. I gotta look up how to do this. I kind of forgot how to do it again, but I think it's get hat. If we want to know how the joystick object works, you can go to Pygame joystick joystick. This is everything a joystick object can do. So we have get name, get axis, get, I think it's a get hat. Yeah, get hat. So that's the method I want to run. And it returns the tuple of the current hat state. So we'll do get hat. That's going to return the tuple. So, and remember, we made, in our constants file, we already set up variables for the values of all these things. So I can just check that. So we actually need to import constants. Import constants as C. So if it equals C, hat, yeah, C, what do we call it? Oh, we call it XB. XB hat left, then it's going to do the same thing as the keyboard did. So it's going to do actor dot velocity x equals negative actor speed. This should work. However, he's not going to stop. And I'll explain that in a second. So let's go to main. So it's not working. So let's find out why. First thing I want to do is actually want to print to make sure it's even finding a joystick. So let's print this whole statement out. Oops, not print that. Let's print self number of joysticks to make sure it's even finding any joysticks. So yeah, see, it says it found a joystick, and I think I know what the issue is. I think the ID it can't start with 0. It probably has to start with 1. No, I guess it has to start with 0. So let's find out what's going on. We're running our handle events function. We're checking joystick events. We're passing the event and the actor into it. So let's see if it's even detecting hat motion. So I'm having it print a T to the screen if it just detects hat motion at all. And it's not. So this is probably, let's see if it's even making it into our check joystick event. Oh, it is. Okay, so that's working. So the issue is if event type equals pygame.hatMotion. It's not making it in here. So let's find out why. Give me a second. Let me read this documentation. I knew I would stumble on this. I haven't done controllers in a while, and I remember they're a little tricky. Get hat motion. I'll kind of show you what I'm reading. What was it? The following event types will be generated by the joystick. Get hat motion. All right, guys, sorry about that. I actually figured out what it was, and it's always something really stupid. This is one of those modules where you have to actually initialize the module itself. So what I had to do is right when we make our event handler object, I had to do pygame.joystick.init to initialize the joystick module. And then I also had to do, once you create a joystick object, the object itself has to be initialized. It's just one of those quirky things that you gotta, I don't know, you just read the Python documentation, read their examples, and you'll figure it out. But all our code was actually right down here. But it wasn't detecting joy hat motion because it won't check for that unless you have a joystick that's been initialized like this. So again, all I had to add was pygame.joystick.initialize to initialize the entire module itself. And then each individual joystick object you make, you also have to run its initialize function, and it'll start detecting joy hat motion. So if we press play, I can move left, but I can't move right because I haven't programmed that, and I also don't stop when I move left. I'm stopping now because I'm hitting the border, but what we need to do, I need to go back to constants.py, and there's actually something I want to put here called XBox hat neutral, and that equals 0, 0. And that's going to make it where we actually stop if we return to the neutral position. So let's go back to our event handler and do elif self.joystick.getHat0 equals c.xb hat right. Then we're going to want to move right. So actor.velocityx equals actor.speed. And then what we want to do is check to see if we've returned back to the neutral position. So if self.joystick.getHat0 equals c.xb hat neutral, and our velocity x equals 0. And now I want to control for the actual button presses. So I want it to be like the A button shoots, which I think was just button 0. So you can do f self.joystick.get, I think it's get buttons. Let me look that up because I forgot. Yes, joy button down. So if it would actually be out here. So if event.type equals pygame.joy button down, if self.joystick.get, I believe it was get button. Let's see. I'm looking at the documentation again. So every joystick object can do a get button. Yeah, so get button. And what does that return? Get the current button state. So yeah, so you can actually just pass in the button value. So we'll do, yeah, so the button value was CXBA. and we're gonna do actor.shoot. This should work. Yeah, so now I can use the Xbox controller and move and shoot. So sorry that one took so long. Like I said, I haven't really used the joystick module that much, but when you get it working, it's really cool. It's just kind of tricky at first because that Initialize thing. Like I said, there's a couple modules in Pygame where you have to actually initialize them separately outside that Pygame init function. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.